BBC Radio Bristol now. Colleagues refused to work with him and he was forced to leave the country. But today, the doctor who blew the whistle on the Bristol baby heart scandal is being recognised for his crucial role in exposing what happened. Dr. Stephen Balson spoke out in the 90s about the high number of babies dying on the operating table at the Bristol Royal Infirmary.
I was concerned enough to contact my director and let him know that I felt that this was a wholly inappropriate operation. And I also alerted the Department of Health to the possibility that a child was being put at risk in this trust.
Well, now he's being given the highest award possible by the Royal College of Anaesthetists. It comes as a Bristol MP calls for better protection for those speaking out. Sarah Barnett exposed high death rates at a residential care home near Glastonbury in Somerset. She says it's not an easy thing to do.
There'd been an inspection and the inspection had given the home an all clear. So that put me off for a long time because I decided that it must be my perceptions rather than the reality. So this has built up over almost a year all in all. I'd also phoned the CQC helpline and asked about the process for raising a concern anonymously. And there was a lot of hesitation, so I felt that wasn't an option. That again delayed when I eventually managed to raise the concerns officially. And all those factors put together, I still find very hard to live with, because actually from that time until when I raised the concerns and had the meeting, 6 further residents had passed away at the home.
Well, Professor Stephen Balson is the person who blew the whistle on the Bristol baby heart scandal and joins me on the programme now. Steve, good morning.
Good morning, Steve.
Good to talk to you. How much soul-searching, Steve, was there before you thought that things had got to such a state that you had to say something?
Well, an enormous amount. I think I used to discuss it with a lot of colleagues and also at home with my wife, and we were very, very concerned for a very long period before I actually spoke out about this issue. But you have to remember, I'd raised the issue within the organisation at numerous levels and on multiple occasions, even with the chief executive of the hospital, but no action was being taken. So whistleblowing is really a last resort that people only really resort to after a series of safety breaches have actually forced somebody to go outside the organisation.
And in this case, of course, lives were being lost and the most vulnerable when it comes to babies. What sort of reaction were you getting when you were going to the high level then and saying, wait a minute, there's something wrong here?
Well, unfortunately, the response was mostly that they wanted to keep the paediatric cardiac surgery service going because it was receiving super-regional funding, and if they had suspended some of the operations, they felt that they would not have got the money that they wanted. So it was really largely financial motives for the trust, and they were putting all these babies at risk.
Was that head in the sands, do you think, or was that big money talking?
I think it was partly money. I think it was partly the pride of the surgeons. But the latest calculation is that probably as many as 170 children died unnecessarily in Bristol.
Yeah, and how were you being treated then by your colleagues? This took quite a while, didn't it? We're talking a few years of a time span here.
Yes. And initially, I actually decided that I didn't want to be part of that service, so I gave up my paediatric cardiac commitment. And then when I started to raise concerns, the cardiac surgeons said that some of the cardiac surgeons said that they couldn't work with me. And then there were issues raised around constructive dismissal and whether I could continue work with the trust.
So you were almost being blackballed. You were almost being sent to Coventry. Somebody called you the most unpopular cardiac surgeon about at that time.
That's right. Yes.
And you going home, you're talking to your wife about this. What was life like, Steve? How did you cope with that?
It was very stressful. I think I was a very different person under those pressures. I can remember within a couple of weeks of arriving in Australia, my young son, about 6 years old, just looking up at me and saying, "Daddy, why do you smile more in Australia?"
Yeah. Do you regret having spoken out?
No, not at all, no.
The bigger picture, looking at it now and what has been changed since then, of course, or we'll come on to Charlotte in half a second, just wondering how much things have changed, because whistleblowing is still such a contentious issue. Was the culture, Steve, just before we go on to that, was the culture in Australia very, very different?
Yes, very different. At the interview that I went to, I explained why I was leaving Bristol, because I felt that the hospital needed to know, and the chairman of the board said that's actually a very positive attribute, and we think you would be a good appointment on that basis.
Stay on the line. We'll bring Charlotte into the conversation. Charlotte Leslie, Conservative MP for Bristol North West, calling for an inquiry into whistleblowing policies. This, Charlotte, following the care, the home care worker case of Lisa Martin at Orchid View.
Absolutely, and it seems that nothing much has changed. That's the tragedy and the horror that we had the Bristol Heart scandal some years ago now, and then we see the mid-staff scandal where people were trying to speak out and nothing was happening, and people were getting crushed in a sense from speaking out. And you hear time and time again whistleblowers who are alerting the authorities to large issues of patient safety, who should be celebrated. People should be saying, brilliant, we didn't know this was going on, thank goodness for helping us save lives, are treated like pariahs. And I have such enormous respect for whistleblowers because they really do put everything at risk, their income, but their families, their families' security and everything to do the right thing for other people.
But we just heard from a charity this morning that the Public Concern at Work charity said, come to us, phone us up, talk to us, talk through it. 3,000 people have done just that. But, when you go to your line manager, or as Steve Balson did, go to the top level, they were worried about financing and all sorts of things. He found himself being ostracised by the very people he's working with.
It's absolutely appalling, and it's such an indictment of our system that you have to resort to whistleblowing. And Steve said what should happen is you should raise the concerns at the appropriate level, and someone should go, that's really not right, let's look into it. Whistleblowing happens when people have exhausted all the lines they should be going to. And I'm absolutely appalled that we are not like Australia, and that whistleblowers find it really hard to get work. I've spoken to whistleblowers who have been trying to look for work for 2 years after exposing, absolutely, correctly exposing terrible mistreatment of patients. Now, if an organisation has nothing to hide, they should be saying, as they said in Australia, brilliant, you're the kind of person who, A, doesn't go native. I think sometimes it's very difficult. When everyone else seems to think something's okay and you're thinking, no, this isn't okay, it's very difficult. You think, well, maybe it's me going mad.
Yeah.
But these are people who don't go native. But secondly, not only do they not go native, they've actually got the moral backbone and enormous moral courage to risk their own well-being to speak out. Now, these are exceptional people, and if you're wanting to run an organisation that's focused on patient safety, surely these are the first lot of people you want to employ. If you don't, and you're an organisation that doesn't employ these people, the question has to be asked, what has that organisation got to hide?
Yeah. What do you make, Steve? Are you bitter at human nature as a result of this whole thing, that more people at the time didn't come around and say, yeah, you're absolutely right, we've got to change this?
I think some of the people were held accountable in subsequent inquiries, and I think that was appropriate, but I think it was a more widespread issue amongst the clinicians and the managers than actually just the 3 people who were found guilty of serious professional misconduct.
Is it like an old boys' club in some ways? Do people close ranks?
Absolutely, yeah. I think certainly in Bristol there was a club culture was identified which was very, very unhealthy and allowed all these unnecessary deaths to continue. But I think looking at what the Royal College of Anaesthetists is trying to do, they're trying to build in patient safety initiatives which will help to monitor performance of anaesthetists and allow them to see their performance so that in fact they can, if necessary, blow the whistle on themselves and get retraining. And
Charlotte, for all the changes in legislation and all the rest and putting different bricks in place, how do we change the culture?
Well, that's the biggest challenge. You can slap down legislation all over the place and it doesn't change culture. I think we have to get on and do something. I think rewarding whistleblowers and high-profile whistleblowers is very important. The CQC, I'm very pleased to see, has taken on a chap called James Titcombe, whose son Joshua died tragically at Morecambe Bay. He was, in a sense, was a whistleblower and campaigned. Now, he's been taken on. That's a good start. But I want to, in a sense, track whistleblowers and see how they're getting employed, ask questions about why they're not getting employed, and see them recognised in honour systems and celebrated by all of us as the heroes that they are.
All right.
And that's the only way you can turn around culture, I think.
Indeed. Charlotte Leslie, thank you very much indeed. Steve Balson, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Really appreciate you coming on the show, and also congratulations on the award.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed. Steve Balson, Bristol Heart scandal whistleblower. Would you do it? Would you feel that there were the mechanisms in place to support you? Would you feel support from your colleagues? If you saw something wrong, would you keep your head down or would you say something? 0845 900 5949. Listening to that, it's just not an easy, is it, or an ethical subject for you to get your head round. But what do you think you would do? 0845 900